Good morning. I'm Chris Stewart. I'll be your MC this morning. Just ask you to silence your phones. We will be videotaping this morning, so it'll be posted on the BBG website in a couple days, as well as the presentation materials will be posted as well. So we're going to move through this rather quickly. For those of you who have attended these, we start on time and we end on time to get you in and out. We also want to leave some room for questions at the end of the two presentations this morning. We're pleased to be partnered with the Broadcasting Board of Governors as we continue our monthly series on topical research findings from various markets around the world. This effort is in support of BBG's mission to inform, engage, and connect people around the world in support of freedom and democracy. Today we're going to take a look at findings from Turkey, obviously a very dynamic market. A lot of changes going on, a lot of impact on journalism in the country, particularly in the last 12 months. So I think these are going to be rather interesting findings. We're going to split the presentation in two. So the first half of the presentation will be data from our Gallup World Poll, which is a global initiative that we launched back in 2005 that we do at least annually in 165 countries. And so one of my colleagues will present that, and then we'll go into more specific media findings to talk about media usage in Turkey, and then also a little bit on Kurdish speakers in Turkey as well. So our first speaker this morning is my colleague, Mr. Benjamin Ryan, a research consultant here at Gallup. Ben is a former journalist in the Middle East and a former U.S. government social scientist. So without further ado, Ben.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you all for joining us this morning. As Chris mentioned, I will start us off by taking us through some of our findings on Turkey from the World Poll, just to set the scene a little bit. And just briefly, as Chris mentioned, World Poll, we've been doing that for a little over 10 years now. We survey most countries in the world at least once a year, and those surveys are about 1,000 people per. Looking at Turkey specifically, we've done 13 nationally representative surveys in Turkey since August of 2005. The first 9 up through 2013 were all face-to-face interviews with interviewers following randomized routes throughout the country, interviewing people at their homes. Since 2014, we switched to a CADI, that's a computer-assisted telephone interviewing method, where we do random digit dials to mobile phones and landlines and conduct the interviews that way. Our last survey was in April of 2016, so this will be a bit of a snapshot just before the events of this summer, sort of giving you a context of what was the situation in Turkey as that happened. Regardless, all of these surveys in each wave are 1,000 people per. The target is all adults 15 years of age or older, the exception being 2005, where we interviewed people who were 18 years of age or older. In 2012 and 2014, we did 2 waves, so those years have total survey of 2,000 people. Just to look at our demographics from our sample in 2016, I wanted to call out a couple of highlights here for context as we look at the different trends and patterns. So we have only 12% of respondents in Turkey have a college education or higher, and 29%, almost a third, have only up to an elementary level of education, though the most have somewhere in between. Gallup measured Turkish unemployment at 11% in 2016, and this is actually exactly in line with the Turkish Statistical Institution and their official metrics. 23% of Turks are full-time employed for an employer. That's actually a bit low. Worldwide, that average is 26%. In the US, for comparison, that's 45% right now. And one last metric I wanted to call out here is that 49% of respondents in this past year said that at some point in the previous 12 months, they had they had not had enough money to afford food. That's actually pretty high. In the Middle East region, that average is 40% in 2016. Worldwide, the average is 29%. So I want to take us through thematically, first looking at the security and legal institutions and feelings about those in Turkey, followed by the economic sphere, and then wrapping up with politics and media freedom. So one thing that jumps out at us here is that, in general, confidence in military is quite high. This is something that we see in many countries around the world. Confidence in military is usually among the highest of any institution. Turkey actually looks a lot more like the US on many of these questions than it does its regional neighbors or global averages. 84% in 2016 of respondents said that they had confidence in military. That compares to 87% in the US, but only 78% worldwide and 77% within the region. Confidence in the police at 78%, again, is relatively high at 68%, worldwide 69% in the region, much closer to the US at 82%. And then confidence in the judicial system is at 45%, much lower. That's close to where the US is at 43%, but much below regional averages of 50% or the world average at 58%. That, of course, as you can see, has been declining slightly since 2010 in comparison to confidence in the local police, which has been increasing more or less since that time. And whereas before these were more tracked closely in line with each other, local police confidence has increased to about just shy of where the military confidence is. Looking specifically at 2016, obviously these feelings are not even across demographics. Confidence in the judicial system decreases with education level, and this is something that we'll see on many of these metrics throughout this presentation, is that generally those with college education have lower confidence in institutions, lower approval of leadership. One thing we saw with the judicial system is that confidence also decreases with income. Those in the top two quintiles have lower confidence than those below. Now, income and education generally correlate with each other, but the income pattern here is not something that we saw with other metrics. By contrast, confidence in local police, much higher across demographics. Here we saw again the pattern with education, with higher education having lower confidence. But in this case, we saw that, in fact, age group was another important relationship where confidence increased with age. Those in the lowest group, 18 to 24-year-olds, had the least amount of confidence. However, across all of these, we still see majority confidence, even 62% among the college educated. And we see, again, a similar pattern with the military, but again, confidence just generally higher across the board. We did not see this age pattern with confidence increasing with age for the judicial system, by the way. Taking a regional look real quick, we see generally higher confidence in the North Black Sea region and in the central Anatolia region around Ankara, as well as in the east, the northeast. Generally, we see much lower confidence in the southeast, southeast Anatolia. This is a more remote, rural and mountainous region, higher Kurdish population. It's also the region that borders Syria and Iraq and has felt the most direct influences and spillover from those conflicts. So generally, feelings about the security situation in that region tend to be lower. You'll note also that we've included feelings of being safe walking alone at night. This is a question that we ask that is usually a pretty good proxy for security issues generally. And again, you'll see the lowest metrics are in the southeast Anatolia, but also in the Marmara region in the northwest. This is dominated by Istanbul. Switching now to the economic sphere, we've seen generally improving views of the economy in Turkey since 2009. Obviously, 2009 was the global financial crisis, and Turkey was also affected there. And since then, views on the economy in Turkey have been increasing. In 2012 and 2013, we did see a little bit of a dip, a deviation from this general trend. That's about the time when the conflict in Syria was ramping up, and Turkey started to feel direct influences from that. One thing also to note is that in 2013, our survey fielding overlapped with the massive Gezi Park protests centered around Istanbul, but of course that had spread to numerous cities around the country, and that may be impacting views on our survey in that year. Once again, taking a look at the 2016 data here, we see in general that those with higher education generally feel less good about economic conditions, less good about the job market. This is actually a bit reversed from what we would normally expect to see, because those with higher education typically have higher income, they have more opportunities economically, they're usually more positive, but that's not what we're seeing in Turkey. In fact, the reverse. In terms of age, younger demographics are more positive about standard of living and about economic conditions generally. You'll see that 18 to 24-year-olds, 2/3 of them say that their standard of living is currently getting better. That's compared to 46% nationally. Those in the top of the age range, much more likely to say that their standard of living is getting worse or at least staying the same. We also see this reflected in Gallup's Life Evaluation Index, where younger cohorts much more likely to be thriving, older cohorts more likely to be suffering. And this index, just briefly, is a composite of two questions that we ask respondents to rate their lives today and in 5 years. And those who are thriving are those who are at the top of the scale and expect to do even better in 5 years. Those at the bottom in the suffering category, at the bottom of the scale now, and don't expect any improvement. Those who are struggling are generally all the rest in the middle. Looking out at the confidence in political institutions, these have been, other than some breaks from trend here and there, relatively consistent compared to what we normally see over this period, and especially in light of all of the political changes that have been happening in Turkey. We see generally right now, in 2016, President Erdogan's approval rating, 58%, right in line with the confidence in the national government. And you'll see that those in recent years have tracked pretty closely together, perhaps an indication of his centrality currently in the governing structure. Our measure of corruption in government, when we ask people, do you feel like there is a lot of corruption in government, has been trending down slightly in this period. And right now is at a low of 46% of respondents saying yes to that question. This may be a little bit surprising given some of the major corruption scandals, especially in December of 2013. And again, this is before the events of this past summer, so we don't know necessarily how that has changed since June and July. One thing to note on this metric is that ratings of corruption in government are heavily tied to approval of the leadership. So those who say they disapprove of the job that President Erdogan is doing, 80% of those say that there is a lot of corruption in government. In fact, those who approve of his job performance say that 25% of them say that they don't know whether there is corruption in government. So that may be affecting the national averages that we're seeing here. Drilling down again, the major difference that we see time and again is on education. Those with college education or higher, much less confidence, much less approval in their national government, national leadership, more likely to say that there is high levels of corruption in government. And in fact, you'll note corruption in government, that question has some of the highest levels of don't know and refuse that we've seen on any of these questions in Turkey, an indication that there's perhaps some doubt on that question. And once again, regionally, we see some of the same patterns. in the north and the center, higher approval, higher confidence. In the peripheries, the southeast and the west, especially, lower confidence and less positive views. Coming down to the specific question of fear of expressing political opinions. In fact, since 2007, we've seen more and more Turkish respondents saying that only some or none are afraid of expressing their political views in the country. And we've seen, again, the opposite side of that scale decreasing. Now, in the southeastern Anatolia, that is still a majority view that many or most are afraid to express their political opinions. And we see that among the college educated, that's also a majority view of 55%. Finally, bringing us back a little bit more to our topic of discussion today, media freedom. So Gallup asked a question about whether respondents feel that their media has a lot of freedom in their country. And currently, 38% of Turkish respondents say yes, their media has a lot of freedom. This has actually been relatively consistent over the past several years, though there has been a decline from the 2013-2014 period in the last 2 years. This is despite outside observers such as Freedom House showing a general decline of media freedom in Turkey over this period. Freedom House's Press Freedom Index, generally the higher numbers indicate less freedom, lower numbers indicate more freedom here. One possible explanation of this disconnect in terms of trends is that Gallup's media freedom metric has a bit of a complex relationship with the Press Freedom Index when we compare them. Those below the 50th percentile mark on the Press Freedom Index, so those on the more free half of that chart, tend to have a strong relationship with Gallup's metric on media freedom. So the more that Freedom House thinks your country has free press, the more those populations are inclined to agree. Above that 50th percentile mark, there's no relationship. Turkey, signified by the red dot there, of course, is smack dab in the middle of that top half for the Press Freedom Index. So the fact that they have their metric on that has little relationship with the number of people saying so in Gallup's survey is perhaps not as surprising. And then finally, just to look at this change that we saw in those last 2 years, from 2013-2014 to the 2015-2016 era, most of the decline in belief in media freedom was concentrated in the rural population and among the youngest cohorts, those 18 to 24 or 25 to 34. It was also much more prominent in the top and bottom of the income scales, so the poorest and the richest in Turkey. Men also saw a greater decline than women did. And again, regionally, we see that the lowest rating of media freedom is in the southeast, highest is in the central and the north. So some key takeaways just to wrap up, because I know that was a lot. Confidence in military is consistently high in Turkey. It is lower among youth and the college educated and in the southeast, but nobody is below 75% confidence in military. Confidence in the judicial system has fallen, while confidence in police has risen. Again, this follows some of the same demographic patterns of those with higher college education, lower confidence, and regionally as well. Generally, the economic outlook has gotten better over this period since 2009. That's been a strong point. Those in the younger cohorts and the less educated are more positive on the economy. And then finally, confidence in political institutions appears to be relatively consistent over this period, though there are strong differences underneath those national averages. More educated have lower confidence, and again, you see the same regional divides here. Fear of expressing political opinions has been declining, but so has belief in media freedom. And that's especially true among youth and among rural residents. So with that, we'll go ahead and turn our presentation over to our esteemed colleague from VOA.
Thank you, Ben. Our next presenter this morning is Mr. Bill Bell, the Director of Research for the Voice of America. Bill's a longtime media research veteran. He's also a former career Foreign Service officer. So he has an interesting take on media research. He's probably the veteran in the United States government today of media research. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Bill Bell.
Good morning. I'm not sure if there's any significance to the fact that the curtains went down just before my presentation, but so I'll be speaking to you this morning about the media scene in Turkey. Just a couple of years ago, some people were starting to ask why the VOA is still broadcasting in Turkey. After all, was by all appearances a modern, sophisticated country with a robust and vibrant media market. What was the need for VOA? Well, I think the events of the past couple of years have answered that question. And given the situation that we're seeing now and probably in the foreseeable future, there'll be a important role for VOA for quite some time to come in Turkey. Was this sound okay? I'm hearing an echo up here. It's fine. Okay, good. So what does the Turkish media market look like? I'm going to present the results of a national survey that was conducted in Turkey in May and June of 2016. This was part of the long-standing series of collaborative projects that BBG does together with Gallup to study media markets around the world, as well as to evaluate the role and impact of BBG in those markets. We conducted a national survey of 1,700 respondents in Turkey by phone, using both landlines and mobiles, including a robust sample of Kurdish speakers in the country. There were no geographic exclusions. So just to give you a brief overview of the market, at least on the surface, Turkey remains among the most developed media markets targeted by VOA, but the apparent abundance of media belies the extreme contraction in media freedom that we've seen and that was referred to in the previous presentation over the past couple of years. We saw that Reporters Without Borders is putting Turkey now in 151st place out of 180 countries they study around the world, and that was, by the way, in 2016. I don't know what the next iteration of that annual report is going to say about Turkey, but things certainly have not gotten better in the past year with the closure of media outlets, arrest of journalists, censorship of the media, and so on, and as well extreme self-censorship by those media organizations that remain in existence in order to stay out of trouble. So again, the survey that we're reporting on here took place before the events of last July, so it's a bit of a snapshot of what things looked like at that time. So we started out by asking people how important they felt it was for them to follow the news. 67% of our respondents reported that they felt it was very important to follow the news on a regular basis. But what's interesting is when we dug a little deeper into the findings, we found that there was a big difference between the younger and the older respondents answering this question. Those in the youngest age group, 15 to 24, only 50% of that group felt it was important to follow the news, whereas 80% of those 55 and older said the same thing. Now, we're not sure why this was the case. One could speculate that younger Turks are more cynical about the news, or simply have other interests, as we see in some environments. But this is a somewhat unusual finding to see that younger Turks are that much less interested in following the news than their older compatriots. So we asked next what media platforms people use to follow the news. The big takeaway in this slide, of course, is that TV and internet are the most important platforms that people are using. But you can see if you look carefully at the gray bars that represent the the lighter gray bars representing the 15 to 24 age group, that internet actually has become more important than television, with 76% of the younger Turks reporting that they use internet daily for news, while only 61% of that group use, of the older group use internet. 48% use internet daily for news. So a big difference there. Press is still relatively important in Turkey, a bit more so than we see in some other countries. We asked not just about media platforms, but about top news sources as well. The question here is to name the top 3 media sources that the respondent used to get news and information. And what struck us was that in spite of the relative importance of internet as a platform, the actual media outlets that people mentioned were all TV stations. You can see the list here of the top TV stations by this criterion. There was a significant difference among certain demographic groups, particularly those best educated, who were much more likely to cite NTV and CNN Turk, much more news-oriented operations than some of the other stations mentioned here. But again, we're all talking about TV stations as the key information sources that Turks say they go to. We asked people what kind of media equipment they have in their household. You can see that almost everybody has access to internet. More than 80% say they have internet in some fashion in the household, and almost 3/4 say they have a computer in the household as well. 46% say they have a tablet. Satellite dishes are also very widespread in Turkey, and this is a long-standing phenomenon. That goes back to the days of a stricter regulatory environment in Turkey, when a number of TV operations set up shop elsewhere in Europe to broadcast to the Turkish market because they couldn't actually broadcast in Turkey itself. So people have had satellite dishes in large numbers in Turkey for a long time. And this phenomenon, in addition, of course, to widespread digital access, gives Turkish households access to lots of news and information and entertainment as well from outside of the country. Virtually everybody in Turkey has a mobile device, certainly over 90% now, and strikingly, most of those are smartphones, particularly among the younger population, where close to 90% of that group now says that they own a smartphone. And this plays out, as you can see, when we ask people how they access the internet, assuming they do. This is among past week internet users. You can see that 90% or more, depending on the age group, use mobile devices to access the internet, although people use computers and laptops as well. So quite a robust picture in terms of ways of accessing the web. We looked at what languages people use to access the internet. Obviously, everybody does it in Turkish, but there's a very substantial amount of web use or internet use in English as well, particularly among the younger population, where just over half of that group reports accessing the internet in English on a regular basis. And you can see on the right of the slide, among Kurdish speakers, 30% of that population reports accessing internet sites in Kurdish as well. So for that population, there's a whole separate group of Kurdish websites that they can go to in addition to Turkish and English. We looked at what people do on the internet. Watching video was far and away the most important activity, again, especially among the younger population there. But we found quite a few, almost half of the respondents saying they read blogs on the internet as well, and this is perhaps significant in an environment where media has become much more restricted. There may be other ways for information to get around. Now, this could have changed in the past year. The authorities, of course, have taken strict measures to try to circumvent circulation of information on the internet, but at least as of the time that this survey was taken, reading blogs and to some extent posting comments on blogs was a significant, pretty widespread internet activity. We also asked about websites used in the past week, and this slide looks at the results for some of the main more socially oriented and search-oriented sites. This is a pretty typical picture for most of the countries in which we do research. What's perhaps striking here, once again, is the age differences. You can see that younger internet users in Turkey are very, very likely to be using YouTube and to be using Instagram, and to a somewhat lesser extent Twitter. And that also mirrors findings we've seen from some other countries where younger respondents, or younger citizens, are more likely to use some of these other platforms than older internet users, particularly Instagram these days. We looked also at internet news sites, and that's what this slide is actually about. Main internet news sites used in the previous week, and these are the top ones mentioned. What's striking here is that even the most used of the main news-oriented websites, Haberturk, was cited by only 10% of the internet users, and what this suggests is there's a very wide spread among the various news-oriented internet sites in terms of where people go and what they rely on for news on the internet. No single site is dominant. Now, getting to the question of confidence in media and trust, we asked about the main news-oriented stations, broadcasters in Turkey, how much confidence, how much trust people repose in the information and news that those broadcasters put out. And you can see the results here. For most of the stations we asked about, particularly the Turkish ones, confidence was pretty high by and large, at least as reported. It was less so for CNN and BBC. Now, CNN is somewhat ambiguous because you have CNN Turk, which is essentially a Turkish language station, certainly, and really a more of a local station than not, and then the CNN International, so people could have been thinking about one or the other and answering that question. But looking at BBC, which is clearly a foreign station, we see much less confidence in that station than others. Although I should point out that the respondents on whom these data were calculated were not necessarily users of these stations. They were speaking about the stations by reputation, whether they actually watched them or not. Now, more generally, we asked about satisfaction with the Turkish media, and this is a bit similar to the question that Ben referred to in his presentation about media freedom, but also a little bit different. Not how free are the media in Turkey, but how satisfied are you with the media in Turkey. And you can see here that 19% of all respondents reported being very satisfied, but a significant portion of the respondents, just about a quarter, reported having some degree of dissatisfaction with the Turkish media in general. And this was particularly high among the better educated population, where just about 40% of those respondents said that they were somewhat or very dissatisfied, and indeed a quarter of the better educated Turks reported being very dissatisfied with the Turkish media. So there's a pretty significant portion of the population that doesn't like what's available to them locally now. Now, somewhat surprisingly, we didn't find much change in that indicator over the past couple of years based on the surveys that we've done. The last time we did a survey comparable to this in Turkey was 2013. We asked the same question: how satisfied are you with the media? And basically, we didn't see much difference this year and 3 years ago. We'll be looking, of course, the next time we do a survey in the country to see how much that's changed given the events of the past year, and which presumably will continue. So in this environment where you have still some significant portion of the population expressing dissatisfaction with the local media, it's reasonable to ask to what extent people use foreign media. Now, we didn't ask that question explicitly, but we did ask about the usage of a number of specific foreign stations. You can see those listed at the top of the slide here: BBC, CNN, the international CNN, VOA, Bloomberg, and so on. Added those up and got these results for the percentage of the population that's relying on some foreign media. Presumably it's probably higher than that because there are other foreign media not listed in the questionnaire. But you can see just under 20% of respondents reported using foreign media on a regular basis. And among those with higher secondary or higher education, it was 40%. Obviously, this tallies with the previous results we saw about dissatisfaction with local media and how that correlates with demography. And here's how that stacks up against the best use of foreign media stacks up against satisfaction with Turkish media. It makes sense that we see that those who are dissatisfied with the local media are more likely to use foreign media than others are. So I'll close by talking a bit about a little bit of attitudinal research that was on the survey, not something we typically get into very much because our surveys are primarily oriented towards media, but we did do a little bit of analysis of public opinion. And these are some questions that were suggested to us by our colleagues at the State Department, in which we ask respondents to rate the importance of various attributes that a country might have in their evaluation of that country, and then to go on and rate the United States in terms of its adherence to or embodiment of those same attributes, and to score in each case both an ideal country and the United States on a 1 to 9 scale. So that may sound a little bit confusing and abstract, so let me show you how that actually looks in the questionnaire itself. You can see on the left-hand side the list of actual attributes they're asked about. Does a country have good schools? Does it protect human rights, and so on, and how important that is for a country in general, and then to what extent do those attributes describe the United States, again on a 1 to 9 scale. So in analyzing this data, we took the simple means of the responses, and you can see in the column in the center here, this was the mean score for the importance of these attributes in evaluating a country in general. And then on the right, the extent to which the United States embodied those attributes in the minds of the respondents. And you can see on the chart here that just about all of the attributes that were listed in the abstract were considered pretty important for a country to have. Not too much variation there, but a lot of variation when asked about the extent to which the U.S. typified those attributes. So we see that the U.S. scored well in terms of having good schools, in terms of having good business and economic opportunities, not so well in terms of protecting human rights and in fighting cross-national crime. When we analyzed this data by age, we found a significant difference between the younger population, the 15 to 24-year-olds, and the rest of the population, with the younger Turks almost uniformly viewing the U.S. more positively on each of these attributes than older Turks did. And if you look at the mean scores here, in fact, all of these differences between the younger and older population are statistically significant, with the exception of providing disaster development aid, which was not significant. So younger Turks were more likely to have a somewhat positive view of the U.S. as measured by this criterion than the rest of the population was. And we find the same thing in a more straightforward fashion. We asked a simple question about favorability towards the U.S. The bars at the top contrast the younger and older Turkish populations, and you see a higher favorability among younger Turks than among the older Turks when asked about the United States. Almost half of the younger population actually had a positive view of us. So I think it's nice to end on that somewhat positive note, thinking about the new generation of Turks coming up in the world. So let me just close with a few final points here that reiterate some of the points I made earlier. So we still have a large number of media outlets available in Turkey, but there has been a sharp contraction of media freedom in recent years, which we think will continue given current events there. Much of the population, especially among the better educated, has some degree of dissatisfaction with the Turkish media, but no single media outlet in the country actually has clear dominance in the market. There's a widespread access to satellite TV and digital technology, so people can get information from outside the country if they choose, and many do. Internet is the #1 platform among younger Turks for news, and attitudes towards the U.S. Do appear less negative than in much of the Islamic world, especially among younger Turks. So I'll leave it there, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Bill. We now have some time for questions. My colleagues have microphones. If you just raise your hand, they'll bring a microphone to you. And if you just state your name and your organization. Woody.
Hi. I had a question. I guess this would be for Ben. I noticed that I was writing down some of these statistics, but not all of them. In a country where 57% of people are out of work, how do you square that with yet 68% are satisfied with economic conditions?
Sure. Well, the out of the workforce metric there at the beginning, which I think is what you're referring to, is all those people who are not employed, but also not unemployed, so they're not looking for work either. So this includes homemakers, for instance. And one of the reasons why we see a relatively high level of out of the workforce in Turkey is because women are much less likely to be participating in the workforce in Turkey. So that the unemployment metric and the full-time employed for an employer might be a little bit more indicative. And those right now indicate a weaker job market than certainly we're used to in the US. But one thing that we found in terms of metrics like standard of living, views on economic conditions, a lot of the time they're a lot more responsive to changes in conditions rather than objective conditions at a particular moment in time. So that may be what we're seeing is that increasing economic fortunes, even from a lower level in Turkey, have resulted in more positive views on standard of living and economic conditions there.
If I could follow up, I also kind of raised my eyebrows at the 89% confidence, high confidence in the military, which was the highest of the institutions, even after the coup attempt, in which F-16s were strafing the streets of Ankara.
Sorry, again, that's 84%, but yes, very high. And that was actually in late April of this past year, so before the coup attempt. It will be very interesting to see as we go in the field this year, has that changed? And specifically, of course, among different demographics, has it changed more or not?
Woody, on that point, one of the things I'd say is that for a large part, the Turkish military is very professional. They've been apolitical, like most militaries around the world, and that has come across to the public. Certainly, there were collaborators, individuals from the military that were involved in the coup effort. But I think we'll, in our next round, which will be in the field on World Poll here in the next month or so, we'll have a better sense of where those support levels are for the military.
I don't want to hog them.
Stay tuned.
Right here.
Hi, Val Voce with All Monitor. I was wondering if you plan on doing any internet polls since you have such a large amount of folks that are saying that they go to the internet first rather than phone calls, especially in light of you got a lot of home workers. Just curious.
Sorry, was that for me or for Bill?
I'll take that. We do internet polls from time to time, but they're typically for a very specific purpose. They're not, given the usage rates today, they're not representative of the national population. It's difficult to build a sample frame of internet users unless you go out and survey first through face-to-face or telephone and then come back in and recontact those individuals. So there's a purpose, there's certain purposes for internet polls, particularly if you can get, good good lists, but it's only going to be representative of that population. Next question. Right in the back.
Hi, Chris Toppy, State Department. I have a question for each of you. Bill, just quickly, is Fox News in Turkey similar to Fox News in America, or is it just a brand?
My understanding is they're owned by the Fox Corporation, but the content is not the same. It's a Turkish channel that was bought by the Murdoch Group.
Okay, thanks. And Ben, on your chart with Freedom House, can you explain what your axes were?
Yes, the scatter plot one. Okay, yes, on the vertical axis was the Press Freedom Index rating. So, for instance, in 2016, Turkey had a Press Freedom Index rating of 71, so it was towards the higher end on that scale. No, for it's a little bit confusing there. Freedom House has, as you go up the scale, that indicates less free. So being number one would be number one in press freedom, if you will. And then the horizontal scale was the percentage of the population saying that their media had a lot of freedom on Gallup's World Poll. And that was all the individual dots were all the countries where we had overlapping data from 2016 on those metrics.
Hi, Michael Zlotowicz, also State Department. Given the situation post-coup and for the next round of audience research, will you be taking any special considerations as far as your methodology is concerned? I just ask for our own research. There's high paranoia against answering questionnaires. So just curious.
Do that?
For the audience research, I think that's...
Well, if that refers to us, the survey this year was done by phone, and we'll probably be using phone technology in the future for cost reasons, if nothing else. But no, we conduct surveys in quite a few very sensitive environments around the world, as I know you do at State as well. And one needs to be sensitive about how the questions are formulated, obviously, and take account of possible reluctance on the part of the response to answer them. But since our surveys are media surveys, they tend to be a little bit less sensitive than some of the attitudinal work that others do. So as far as we can tell, people are still willing to answer questions about basic media consumption. Some of the questions that Gallup asks, that may be a little different.
What I will say is that there has been a crackdown on research agencies as well, and the Turkish government has cracked down on them, and it may lead to a situation where we dial in from a third country with Turkish and Kurdish speakers to be able to reach that population. We've done that in other geographies when we can't get it done on the ground. Next question. Dr. Hoover.
Hi, Matt Hoover from Gallup. This question's for Bill. I'm curious, the questions that you asked about the ideal country and the U.S., is that something that is standard that's asked across other countries? And if so, how did the overall breakdown differ or agree between Turkey and other countries?
These are questions actually that were formulated by our colleagues at the State Department, and that we do work with them on, and we've asked in quite a few countries now. I'd have to go back and look at the data to see how Turkey compares with the others. I don't have that at the top of my head.
Any other questions? With that, I'll call us to a close and want to thank you all for attending. Again, the video will be posted on the BBG website in the next couple days, as well as the PowerPoint. I'm sure our presenters will be up here for a few minutes if you have any burning questions that you didn't want to ask publicly. So let's give one nice last round of applause to our presenters.